Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Robinson. I'm the Executive Director of RISE. We are partnered with LISC on our Community Resilience Innovation Challenge. This is our last informational webinar of the series. And I want to give you just a few housekeeping messages here up front, just with a few slides, just a few reminders for you before we turn it over to Jay to introduce our guests today, Freddie Fletcher and Michael Skrebutenas. So just to start, I want to talk about there we are. Just to run through the topic areas, I know that many of you have been looking through and working on your submissions. This is our topic area that's going to be discussed today on the affordable housing. I won't go through each one of the bullets, but it's an important group of topic areas here for us, and they'll be discussed more over the next half hour. Also, we had topic areas in the economic and job security part. And some of this includes having access to partner with LISC and help them on some of their projects and some of their programs too, as they may fit with your company's capabilities and interests. We also had a topic area in health, wellness, and safety. This was an opportunity also for appropriate companies to partner with Centara and some of their wellness programs that they have been trying to develop and roll out in this region. Is a great opportunity to work with Centara here. And obviously environmental resilience, heat, flooding, obviously of great importance to our region. And the crossover between climate and environmental resilience and economic resilience is a key part of what we're trying to address in this challenge. The more resilient economically we can make the community, then the more resilient they'll be to environmental stressors. And this is an important topic area too. Just to note on some of the evaluation tools that we'll be requesting from you. We want you not just to give us your idea of your process or your product, but tell us how it can be applied to a community to actually lower the social vulnerability index, or the CJS, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool Index. There's details of that in our documentation, but we just want you to take the first few steps to identify the topic, what we call the sub-themes and the threats in these two tools, what could be affected by your process and your or your product. That's very important. Then we understand how these things can be implemented in a census tract or in a community to actually reduce their vulnerability and make them more resilient. We also want a business plan. We want to know how you plan on growing your business and your idea after winning funds if you're successful. And also we want to assess your project work plan. All these three things are what are described in the documentation, but they're very important. You'll be judged on all three as you go through this process. Timeline here, well, we're at May 28th. Time flies. This is our last informational webinar. We've had 3 or 4 before it. Application submission deadline is June 6th, 2 p.m. Eastern time. That is a hard deadline. We cannot go past that at all. So please make sure that you're able to submit, get on there early, submit as early as you can. We always get a few calls at the very last minute, but it's not a good idea. July 5th, we will be announcing the finalists. And then these finalists will be asked to submit additional documentation, technical details, a work plan, financial projections. That information will be due July 19th and passed on to the judges. August 2nd, the shortlisted finalists will be announced, and they'll be the ones who will be asked to pitch to our selection committee. And the pitches will be in mid-August, and winners will be announced in September 1. There's plenty of information on the web there's a QR code, there's the website there. But please, between now and June 6th, if you have any problems or questions, reach out to us through this website, and we will respond as quickly as we possibly can. So this is our last webinar, so last time I'll get to say good luck to everyone who's trying to submit. It's an exciting topic, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the submissions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jay to introduce our subject matter experts, our guest speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. I really appreciate it. And so Jay Grant here, Executive Director of LISC Hampton Roads. Brings me great pleasure today to introduce you all to Michael Skrebutenas. He serves as Senior Vice President for Housing at LISC, which is Local Initiative Support Corporation. Of course, we're a national organization with 38 local offices, including Hampton Roads. And also brings me great pleasure to introduce to you all Freddie Fletcher, serving as Senior Development Manager at the Franklin Group, which is a very well-known, successful developer doing a lot of work here in the region and beyond. And so let's get right into it. Today's topic is mostly focused on affordable housing. So I'll turn first to you, Michael. What have you seen as the keys, as being key successes in affordable housing production and or preservation? And where do you still see some opportunities for growth?
Thank you, Jay. I'm delighted to be here with Freddie as well. It's taken us a generation to get into this crisis of underproduction and underdevelopment in affordable housing. And it's going to probably take a generation for us to dig out of it. But the core fundamental means to success will be working hand in glove, working in partnership with every level of government. Government had a major crisis in housing in the Great Depression, had a major crisis in housing right after World War II in creating production. It had profound and deep intervention in the home ownership markets, even through the 60s. To get this done, we need to reinvigorate and re-engage with our governmental partners at every level to crawl out of this hole. So I say, in short, Jay, the federal government walked away from this problem about 40 years ago, walked away from financing affordable housing, and has deposited this crisis on the backs of state and local government. We need now a full integration of every level of government to engage on so many levels: permitting, financing, regulatory issues. We need every level of government to participate.
Well said. So it's really deep as well. I'll turn to you, Freddie. Same question. Have you seen successes in affordable housing, whether production or preservation? Where do you see opportunities as well?
Yeah, we in Virginia are fortunate. We've got a strong state housing finance agency, which is who can allocate low-income housing tax credits, which is the primary way that people do create and preserve affordable housing. And we've seen creativity over the last 5 years where we've seen them institute state housing tax credits that are able to piggyback on top of federal housing tax credits. And that has allowed us to, where projects that were no longer working financially because construction costs had run, or interest rates have gone up, the cost of land has gone up significantly. And so these 4% projects, which are the non-competitive tax credits, typically financed through tax-exempt bonds, those projects were no longer working. Well, the state credit comes in and it helps. It's a gap filler. And that's really what we're seeing success with, is that's probably one of the more successful ones, but overall is these gap fillers, and the state government through state tax credits, as well as the housing trust fund that's been instituted. We've seen that at the local level. Those are all viable approaches. I think the opportunities for growth that we see, though, for me, most transparently, is we've got an antiquated zoning code, and I think even just federally, the interpretation around how zoning should be constructed is messed up, and we're unable to create production because people are in a protectionist mindset around their home, which is their single largest investment for the majority of folks. And therefore, not only are they anti-affordable housing, but just oftentimes new development writ large, which oftentimes comes with additional density. So we're finding that the added burden of going through a rezoning in order to be able to build one of these communities, that's an opportunity where, if you required every municipality to zone 25% of its land for high density housing or medium density housing, you would see, because developers oftentimes are going to potentially overbuild, you would see a significant amount of development pretty quickly because there was available entitled land. So that's I think the biggest path that we see for growth here in Virginia right now.
And so both Michael and Freddie, if I can kind of synthesize what I'm hearing, so kind of a disinvestment by certain levels of government, if not all, in terms of the ability to have tools readily available for developers in this space. And then there's some positives I'm hearing on the local and state side here in Virginia, but still it sounds like it can be tricky navigating zoning, et cetera. So I'm wondering, as a follow-up to both of you, have you seen any tricks of the trade, so to speak, in terms of navigating antiquated zoning, navigating permitting processes? Have you seen any tricks of the trade in terms of navigating these high costs of today as well? And I'll pass that to either of you.
I'll put a plug in for your work, Jay. And the tricks of the trade is not new or novel, but at LISC, we believe our first letter is L, which stands for local. That problems get solved at the local level, and that means on a organizing and on an organizing basis, right? We also believe that kind of engaging our local communities to identify the problem and accept the consequences of the problem, and to try to problem solve with the problem, to try to problem solve, is really essential. So, a top-down mandate sometimes can work, but not always. We believe we have to probably work at both levels, which is to say, Jay is going to organize the communities and organize his communities in Hampton Roads and the places he's working in to build consensus around it, and also, work with our city partners and our state partners to make changes to codes and make it work. So I think it takes both directions. We got to come at it from both sides. I'll turn it over to Freddie.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with you, Michael. And one thing, a note there is we have found tricks of the trade, if you will. Richmond here in Virginia has instituted a lot of very housing forward policies, whether that be real estate tax abatements, which allow us to really increase our debt size and ultimately make these projects financially viable. The difficulty is we have a number of counties and cities that we work in the state of Virginia, and we are just Virginia specific developers. You've got national groups out there that are trying to do it across state lines, working across different tax credit manuals and qualified allocation plans. And what the issue that can create is we can find the way to get it done in one municipality, but then you go to another, and whether it be the zoning code is just completely different, or their perspective on affordable housing is very different, or the way in which you're going to be able to get funds is different. It creates issues trying to push production forward kind of across the state, and then taking that forward even across the country. And so that's really tough. We have seen, again, at the state level, success. There's two ways to solve the problem. One is we can throw money at it, whether that be federal, state, or local. The other is we can create additional efficiency within the program. And it's actually one of the more efficient federal programs, Section 42 tax credit program is extremely efficient. However, there's still opportunities for us to create additional efficiency, and push lower tiers, whether that be the state or local governments, to actually almost play ball with developers to increase that efficiency, whether that be allowing us to get out of certain proffers, that, impacts that are far removed from the project that we're expecting to develop, or opportunities for them to fast track projects through the permitting process. We've seen that in Richmond as well. All of those things help us de-risk and also reduce costs on the project, which then means that we're more efficient with the federal dollars that are coming in through Section 42.
Great, wonderful, thank you. I'll pass this next question first to Michael. What are some housing problems that an organization or company could solve, you think, in a year or two, or in some short time frame that you think could have a big impact? Oh, and you're on mute, Michael. I'm sorry.
Like Freddie, our projects, LISC is fundamentally a lender, and right now we're struggling now, just like Freddie is in his projects, with the cost of capital, right? We're seeing extraordinarily high capital costs, which may be the new norm, and which means, expensive debt soaks up a lot of rental income that would go to other purposes, right? You have to cover that debt service. So, or you have much smaller debt service requiring a lot of subsidy. What we're trying to figure out in terms of finding alternative forms of capital. At LISC, we're talking to public sector actors to blend down public dollars with the cost of capital so we can increase debt size. We're also talking to a variety of other alternative lenders like pension funds and socially motivated pension funds that have cheaper sources of capital because they have a committed mission, but and more tolerant underwriting. So just to kind of summarize, Jay, what we're doing is working with the public sector to inform them that we can't go as far as we once did in terms of their dollars. In order to stretch their dollars, we're gonna have to blend them together with genuine debt and public debt, lowering the cost of capital, and also working with alternative sources of capital, really kind of mission-oriented pension funds, religious pension funds or otherwise, to provide long-term capital to really reach and drive production.
Thank you, Freddie.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, we're seeing, and this is a great forum to talk about this, there's also interest coming in from sectors that you don't think of as being involved in the housing space specifically, but they view housing as a cost. And so we've actually been, we're starting to look to the business community. One of the big players in the Hampton Roads space is Centera, and they view housing because quality housing and new affordable housing has so many elements to it that actually are basically the minimum requirements mean that the quality of that housing, whether that be, to ensure that there won't be any mold or mildew, or that they've got adequate heating and cooling or access to, there are no lead pipes and clean water, and all of that can be a determinant of health outcomes. And so we're seeing groups like Centera put money towards housing in a real way, or potentially contributing land. So religious institutions are also looking at that. There was a push here in Virginia. It didn't get past this most recent legislative session, but to get it was YIGBY, yes, in God's backyard, because we fight against NIMBYs a lot, but it was to allow for basically a by right zoning for high density housing on every religious facility, such that they could go out and produce housing on a lot of them own excess land, just like hospitals do as well. And so I think opportunities to involve religious community, the business community, we're also finding this is an economic development issue for our business community now. And what the hardest thing we're finding, the problem that I think when I think of things that can be solved, is demonstrating the impact that specific projects can have on specific outcomes, whether that be health outcomes, whether that be we're able to, Amazon's building a huge facility here in Virginia Beach with 1,000 jobs. Those jobs are paying $17 to $19 an hour. Those folks need housing unless they're going to commute an hour. So what kind of housing do we need to produce for them? But measuring that impact of how building a project can actually impact the employment in the area, or health outcomes, or among a number of different measurements, being able to have that data to walk to other businesses and say, hey, look, when you invested, your return on capital might be very low, but you're going to see a return to your business in another sense, less ER visits, higher employee retention, what have you.
Freddie, you actually went into my next question, which is really going to, how does affordable housing impact overall community resilience? The first part of it, I think about what is affordable housing. And so as you and Michael have been alluding to, each community, each state work differently. I'm sure you all are no stranger to the NIMBYism regarding real or perceived issues around affordable housing. And again, what is affordable housing? Are we talking workforce housing? Are we talking specific percentages of area median income? Are we talking the HUD definition of 80% or below? I tend to think of it as a holistic view of housing that's affordable, where you're spending as a family unit below a certain percentage of your income, and in particular, focusing on those with lower incomes, and the notion that if we don't have it, or if it's hard to obtain, your community is not fully addressing its housing needs. Therefore, where do folks who have lower paying jobs, where do they live? And the quality of life thus decreases really for everyone. But have you seen how affordable housing's impacts are measured in some of those examples you were alluding to? I'll actually go right back to you, Freddie.
Yeah, I think what we're finding is, and again, I think getting down to a detailed level where we're measuring that and can actually have data for whether it be politicians, business leaders, community leaders, that's what we're lacking. But we do see a few things. One is when you're spending less on housing, and there are people that there's no housing that meets their bucket at all. So there's undesirable affordable housing, and there's some people that can't even afford that. But when you spend less on housing, you end up having more money for other things. So you're not making the difficult choices between paying a healthcare bill, or letting that go to collections and paying your rent, or paying for groceries or childcare. It's also, though, affordable housing is a more stable housing type because of a lot of those income restrictions. And I was talking with a group last week and mentioned that eventually we may end up with a middle income housing tax credit, because there's folks within income bands between 80 and 140% that have a really difficult time finding housing, and quality housing, because they're oftentimes the ones, since they don't qualify for the lower income housing tax credit, that are forced into naturally occurring affordable housing. So housing that's just typically older in age and has become affordable because of the quality of it. But I think that's where we see the resilience is, because it is more stable. The rents are not going to be able to go up beyond what the AMI is going up, and even that's capped. And we're seeing that stability, and then the families are not moving as frequently, and they're able to actually create a community around them. And that allows them to then step their way up, hopefully, because we don't want everybody that lives in affordable low-income housing tax credit housing to stay there. It's supposed to be a bridge towards a market rate or market-driven housing product. And I think that we've struggled to link that bridge all the way, and that actually the gap is getting bigger because we're missing that middle piece after a low-income housing tax credit community. But I think that resilience of allowing people to see that path forward is really impactful for people when they do move in.
Thank you. Michael, any comments on that before we go into some of the Q&A from the audience?
No, I would make the point that 60 to 70 years ago, right, we made the public sector engaged in housing of last resort, which really came in the form of home, which were termed perhaps in a challenging way, termed as asylums for many folks, right? We built sanatoriums and places to house people who struggled with serious and persistently mental illness. We made a policy choice that was an inadequate form of housing, but never replaced it for a period of almost 30 years. Right now, we are building supportive housing, which has clear, across the country, permanent supportive housing for people with mental illness who struggle with, who are at risk of homelessness. We could see the benefits to that housing production type, as Freddie mentioned, right? Fewer visits to the nursing home, less urban distress, or higher quality of life for these residents and for communities. It is, again, we made a very conscious decision to change the housing typology, I think for good reason, but we have failed to build a replacement set of housing for people who struggle with various issues of addiction and mental illness and other crises in their life. So we've got to figure out a replacement. We've got to figure out how to replace that housing, and we're doing it slowly, but not fast enough. So
thank you very much. And so as we're coming to a close, I'm going to combine a couple of questions, and if we can't get to them all, we'll find a way to get to these later. But first couple questions seem to be focused on repurposing. So we want to ask about, particularly, it looks like there's inquiries about Norfolk and other areas in the region about repurposing some larger structures such as Military Circle Mall, MacArthur Center, and repurposing existing structures in general, so existing homes. So think about that, as well as the intersection between housing and climate, and how you think flood risk as well as sea level rise can impact the valuations of people's homes. They're oftentimes their largest assets. So I want to turn it to the both of you, repurposing structures and impact of sea level rise and flooding on home valuations.
I'll take the impact of flooding and what we're seeing here, just given that's such a local issue here in Hampton Roads. It's the biggest driver to making deals work or not is right now is frankly just insurance has ballooned over the last 3 years, and every time a hurricane hits the panhandle, it just gets worse because the reinsurance market is really messed up. And so with that, we're seeing the risk of flooding has really increased, and then we are also having to therefore build our product differently, whether that be building it up and having a basement that's literally intended to flood with floodgates, and all of these things add costs. And so creating resilience, environmental resilience within our cities that each project doesn't have to bear the burden of, but the entire municipality bears the burden of, that can alleviate some of those costs that we're seeing. And then hopefully, and honestly, talking about the federal government, I don't really know what we're going to see, but the insurance market is seemingly on a spiral towards where there's going to be, basically along the eastern seaboard at least, and I imagine in California, almost functionally impossible to find insurance and therefore to get any kind of a loan on that community or home. And so that's a scary thought, and how that's going to impact valuations of properties that are at risk.
Jake, maybe I'll pick up on the adaptive reuse. So here the questions are about a couple of specific properties. I don't know about those Military Circle Mall and MacArthur Center in particular, but I love adaptive reuse. It's a great use of an asset. We all have to come to terms though and accept the fact that not all adaptive reuses are the same. We have a real desire to convert, for instance, downtown office buildings, Class B and Class C downtown office buildings sounds like a great idea, but how do you get light and air and windows to the core of the building? Those are all design challenges. So again, adaptive reuse is very attractive to affordable housing. You save on some costs, but there are some other costs necessary to design to make them attractive and market useful. So again, take a look at properties and think about what it would require in order to get light and air and circulation and make them habitable and make them marketable for families and singles.
Well said. Another question here regarding debt service on affordable housing. It's a question focusing on federal grants instead of borrowing so much. With that being a solution.
Can I make a run at that? I saw that question.
Go for it. Go for it.
Thank you very much for the question. So what you're speaking of would be, in fact, public housing. We made a very conscious decision 30 years ago to honestly starve public housing. Here we are. We have starved an asset class and criticize it for its failure to provide adequate housing for its individuals. So but I just want to put an editorial comment to criticize public housing as a failed experiment seems half of a criticism. It's not fully accurate in my mind because we have made a conscious effort to really deplete it and starve it. So this is to say, there are lots of Western economies that support some various form of public housing, which is fully financed housing. They should not be to apply a blanket criticism to this form of housing tenure is a little overbroad. I think there are ways and means to finance and maintain a publicly supported housing system in a way that kind of can grow and create a stable housing stock. And honestly, we are seeing this impact and the cost to its impact to the housing crisis by really, by our depletion of public housing in many markets. So anyway, Stephen, I want to get to you. If we want to build housing in that manner, that looks and smells like public housing, which I think there is a role for public housing in this equation.
Thank you. And I want to inform you, there's a question regarding the actual application. Is it possible to add the business plan, project work plan, strength of solution? The response is, and this is from Paige at Rise, that you're allowed to update anything in your application at any time before the 2 p.m. Eastern time deadline on June 6th. If you've already finalized and submitted your application before the deadline, you're looking to reopen your application with additional details, email the group at info@riseresilience.org, and they'll get it reopened for you. So info@riseresilience.org. There is a question regarding the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, TOPA, and the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, COPA policies. This person indicates underutilization of effectively building relationships. Anyone able to speak to that?
Jay, just so happens that today LISC produced a paper on TOPA and COPA. So I asked the anonymous attendee, take a look at our website. We just had a study by our research team that talked about our work some of our work we're exploring in New York. We've been very successful in TOPA and COPA work in Washington, D.C., but I'll refer to the document. It's much more authoritative than I can speak to it. Again, it just dropped today on our LISC website.
How timely. Thank you, Michael. And here is a question that maybe, Michael, you want to take a stab at first. Mental illness is indeed one of the causes of lack of access to affordable housing. Who pays for that mental illness treatment? And then where does a mental illness patient reside while undergoing treatment?
Let me just make an editorial point here. I think mental illness, addiction, those are causative factors in housing, but the primary cause to housing distress for this population is the lack of affordable housing. We would all be hard pressed to say that there's an acute number of greater instance of mental illness and addiction now than there was in the early 20th century. We had areas that provided market rate. It was a market solution, inadequate and underfunded, and certainly no place that we'd like to live in. But we had areas that were widely known to provide low-cost housing for people in distress. Now, with that said, right, you know, if we're going to fund this in a dignified manner, it does cost money on the operating side to provide services and care. So it's just another driver of the need for public dollars to support this population. We did it in the early 20th century, throughout the 20th century, in a variety of forms, in skid rows and in slums and in asylums and sanatoriums. This is the 21st century's need to answer this acute population need. We got to, it doesn't come free. You want solutions, it's going to cost. And that dollars, well, it's going to have to get paid for by the public sector.
And just to add there, I think the cost of the treatment, most certainly, what we have found, we've partnered with a group here, and it's not folks necessarily with mental illness, addiction, although some have that as well, but it's primarily folks with developmental disabilities. And we've partnered with an organization, and they get a certain number of units at our community. So they're integrated into the broader tax credit community. However, they might have anywhere from 10 to 20% of the units where they're actually sourcing the residents themselves. They do have to go through our compliance, but then ultimately live in the community. This organization has an office in that community where they can serve their clients. And then those clients actually bring specific vouchers which allow them to pay their rent that they're sourced through the state government, and then they also usually through Medicare, Medicaid, or another payment method are able to pay for the services that they need. And similarly, Jay, I know you're familiar with a project down here at the oceanfront, which LISC is involved in for the Judeo-Christian Outreach Center, JCOC, and that's 38 permanent supportive housing units. Now, that is not integrated with a broader project. It's standalone. However, that's a nonprofit that's bringing that to bear. However, it's the nonprofit itself is significantly reliant upon federal grant funding and state level grant funding for its services. But the housing itself was actually created through the low-income housing tax credit program, which is exciting to see that we are able to, that program can play pretty nicely with a lot of these federal dollars that come in to ultimately provide the services that these residents, these higher need residents need.
Thank you, Freddie. I want to thank both you and Michael for participating, giving us quite an insightful discussion this morning or this afternoon. And so I want to thank our audience as well. I'll turn it over to Dr. Paul Robinson to close us out. Thank you, Paul.
Sorry.
There we go.
I was all turned up. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Freddie. I really appreciate your time and your expertise on this. And we will look for everyone's submissions by June 6th. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions to JRI or anyone on that website. And good luck to everyone. And thank you all for your interest in being on this on these webinars. Thank you.